In this video, we're going to talk about managing common pool resources. In a previous video, we talked about the tragedy of the commons, the famous essay by Garrett Hardin. Many of our contemporary insights about common pool resources come from this essay. The idea that common pool resources with undefined property rights and open access will be necessarily subject to overuse and resource depletion. Now, it is also recommended from a policy perspective that the solution to this would be a system of property rights and state enforcement. People should own things privately rather than have these common resources that would be subject to overuse. That is the popular contemporary insight that is commonly attributed to Garrett Hardin's essay. However, when you actually read the essay, that's not really what it was about. The common theme from this Tragedy of the Commons essay was population growth and it being too much. Rather, it wasn't a technical problem, but one of too many people that were undesirable in Hardin's view. For example, one of his headings is "The freedom to breed is intolerable." Hardin didn't see this as a technical problem of incentives, but rather, for him, it was a moral one. And the problem that, as he conceived it, was too many poor people having too many children and therefore putting a drain on society. They also, throughout the paper, was racist and eugenicist themes, and it really had nothing to do with solving technical problems about access and resource protection. It was more about the nature of society. If you really want to know about how to manage common pool resources, it's best to forget about Hardin's essay and look at the work of Elinor Ostrom. She was an economist who won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2009. Rather than just express a moral opposition to things like immigration and population growth, she actually studied collective resource management. She went around the world and she looked at fisheries and grazing areas that were commonly held rather than privately owned. She found that, in fact, it was possible to manage common pool resources without resource depletion. And she compiled a list of 8 characteristics that made for effective resource use. Now, we could boil these down to just a few general principles. Boundaries. Boundaries needed to be established between groups and the resource, clear rules about the use of those resources, and a process for changing those rules. Monitoring and enforcement, which included sanctions against people that violated the usage rules, and then a mechanism for dispute resolution, typically a low-cost one. Now, all of these could be performed by the state. These could be achieved through private property and state enforcement. However, she found that wasn't always the case. There were examples of local control, collective resource management that did not lead to overuse. The key for Ostrom was decentralization, that we needed to think about the local context, the local culture of the community and the resource. Many of these groups did have either unwritten rules or clearly established customs that govern resource management. So for Ostrom, she found that it was in fact possible to manage collective resources, common pool resources, without private property ownership. So just to recap, the real tragedy here is that people associate the ideas of the Tragedy of the Commons with Hardin's original essay, which really didn't have a lot to do with the technical aspects of resource management. Some communities they are able to manage resources effectively without private property. And for more insight on this, if you really want to learn about common pool resources and the management of them, it's better to study the work of Elinor Ostrom than Garrett Hardin.